Oh, hey, we've been we're going to jump into a different series this week. We're going to 7 signs, and we've been hitting some heavy stuff in Hebrews. Right? It's good, but it's been a little deeper. Not that this message won't be deep; it'll just be a little different. And as we look forward to Easter, if you didn't realize it, and heads up. Wednesday, if you have any friends who are Catholic, they'll have ashes on their head. Don't go, dude, you have something there? Not our tradition, but it's like, I can't tell you how many times I've awkwardly said something because I didn't realize it was ashes. So we don't really do the ashes, but in looking forward to Easter, we're looking really at, I always like reread sections of the gospel all the time, but especially as we enter into Easter. And we're looking at a thing we're going to call it 7 signs because there are 7 signs, kind of like big miracles, things that Jesus does in the book of John. Now, depending on how you count it, you could actually get up 8 or 9. So, but traditionally we've kind of done 7, and that's kind of where I kind of fall. I'll explain more as we go on. But we'll be looking at the book of John. Now, the book of John, those of you who know I love the Gospels in general. You know I love Luke because you hear a lot about it. We read Matthew together. There's lots of good stuff in there. I like Mark because it's like the ADD Gospel because Luke is like the longest and he really emphasizes how the Spirit's working. Matthew, he tells a lot of the same stories, but he does a lot of old Hebrew Bible connections and things that are really cool. Mark, ADD Gospel because he's just like this happened, this happened, this happened. Like it's very kind of, and everyone kind of does their own thing, but then you get to John, who is the one kid who really does his own thing, and he has this whole other way of looking at it. When I was a kid, do you guys remember Sesame Street? I think it was one of these kids is doing their own thing, like 3 kids jumping rope and one's like riding a bike. Anyone? Yeah. So you're not that much younger than me, but I just always remember that. And John is like one of those kids who's doing his own thing, and so we're going to look at some things John says. And so we're going to jump right in. First sign: on the 3rd day, a wedding took place in Cana in Galilee. Jesus' mother was there, and Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. And when the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to him, "They have no more wine." And so this is just like, these are rookie disciples at this point. The disciples are just starting to hang out with Jesus. And it's kind of, it says they were invited, but I'm always like, was it, they were his +1, you're +11. And so Jesus gets invited to the party, he makes the cut to get there. And so Jesus is at a party. Now, it's kind of funny. Jesus is just being a normal person. And I know that's hard for a lot of religious people to just be normal people at a party. But Jesus is being just a normal kind of person. He's hanging out. He doesn't, I always wonder, though, did they ask him to pray? Because, we did the potluck. Nobody would start eating till I got up and prayed, right? And then, any family function, I'm the one to pray. I remember I had to pray at my sister's wedding, which, I started out with, I did perform the ceremony. It says, outside of West Virginia, a man has few opportunities to marry his sister. Sorry, West Virginians, I just got to pick on somebody. You could easily pick on Southern Delaware. There were some Southern Delaware jokes going on this week. Not with me, but I was being told them. I stood up for them, no. But, he's at the party, and, if you read the Gospels, Jesus gets invited to parties, which is always interesting to me, because, he must have been a likable guy on some level. And, John 7:33, or Luke 7:33 says, "For John the Baptist didn't spend time eating bread or drinking wine, and you say he's possessed by a demon. The Son of Man, on the other hand, feasts and drinks, and you say he's a glutton and a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors and other sinners." So Jesus got invited to the parties. And so Jesus is a fun guy. Now, being a fun guy is different than a party animal. People you take that, yeah, Jesus, he's got a mullet, party, business in front, party in the back. Woo! No, that's not how Jesus rolled. But I imagine him being a fun guy. And there's this joy that sometimes, I can't remember the quote offhand. It was like some Christians act like they've been baptized in vinegar. I used that quote, and I just thought of it now, so I couldn't Google it. If you want to pause, I could Google it right now. But you know what I mean? There should be joy. There's joy in faith. Because, I thought I had fun before, I have a lot more fun now, and I have joy. And sometimes, even when circumstances are hard, you have this joy, this fun. You can be a kind of good person to be around. And so Jesus at this wedding, and I always picture, though, 30-year-old unmarried dude at a wedding. You know, you're thinking, mom's like, can you find a nice single girl and settle down? You know, she knew he was a little different, but find a nice girl here. and they run out of wine. Now, this might be a really good idea at some of the weddings some of us have been to, right? Like, I've seen things. I've heard things. Some of them are funny stories, and maybe we'll get together later and tell them. I'm not going to get all of them here, but they often involve a little too much merriment, if you will, and so you picture this is probably, I don't know. I mean, they just got married. Maybe this is the first couples fight, because if you're married and you don't fight, I don't know if you're married, because occasionally when you have two people who grew up in different ways, you get married, there's a little friction. Whenever I told you, when I'm doing premarital counseling and the couple's like, oh, we never fight, I'm just like, oh, I don't want to do this wedding. And I stop them right there and tell them to leave. No, I don't. Because eventually you're gonna have friction over something. And weddings, I don't know all the culture there. I don't know how stressed they are. I mean, sometimes even like the wedding rehearsal can be super stressful. I mean, people get really upset because there's different traditions in different families, and I'm often put in the middle of it sometimes. I'm like, and it's like, and people can be kind of stressed about all the I think more so before, younger brides seem to be a little less stressed about all the details, but especially, 20 years ago, this has to happen at this time, all these things, pretty things happening. Everything has to have like Pinterest shots, I've had photographers between the bride and the groom taking the shots, and I'm like, well, I guess you're getting a good shot, but that's an awkward first dance. But, people kind of worry about all these details. And so I picture this is the first fight, because it's at the wedding and you've run out of wine. And these are like multi-day events. And you've already run out of wine. It's a little embarrassing, it's like, I picture, because men, I don't know, men tend to not do much at the wedding. I mean, I showed up to mine. That's generally the case. Sometimes it's not. But, I remember tying birdseed bags for mine, and I remember showing up, and I think that's it. So my one job was to get there. I picture maybe the groom's one job was to get the wine, and he seriously miscalculated something, and they're arguing, that's why we cut down the guest list. And, oh, it's your Uncle Ezekiel drinking it all, like all kinds of stuff going on. And so I picture too, like, have you ever been to a wedding? Anyone not been to a wedding? A couple of you. You're in for something. It's the best food, because that's really why I go to the weddings. I mean, I know, to celebrate the beautiful union that is marriage, and some of the mashed potatoes at Modern Maturity, if you've ever been there. But some of you know what I mean. You've had those. I don't even eat mashed potatoes on a regular basis. Modern Maturity, man, oh gosh, I fill up like a piñata, man. I'm like, don't squeeze me. I'd be like a giant zit. But anyway, so, the wedding, it's like, there's the anticipation. You're kind of waiting for your table to get called. And a lot of times, because I do a wedding, I end up at like the last table, or they forget about me. And so I'm sitting in the corner. And I can imagine you finally get called up to the buffet, and there's nothing there. No mashed potatoes. I would leave right then. I would not sign the wedding license. I don't know. It's kind of my picture, and it's this awkward moment. It says the mother of Jesus. We know it's Mary, but for some reason, John never uses that name in the gospel. Mary comes up to Jesus. And you kind of, people picture all kinds of things and like why she's coming up to Jesus. It's, blame him for bringing too many hungry disciples. I mean, these guys are fishermen. They probably ate a lot, drank a lot. You're like, oh, great. Peter drank everything. Maybe she, some people think, oh, well, maybe she's gossiping a little. Maybe she's expecting to run out and get more. Like, Jesus, you got some disciples. Could you go out and get some barrels of wine or something? Or was she just whining about it? Come on, that's good. Anyway, she expects something. Again, this is up to 7 days. It's a major faux pas. And Jesus says in verse 4, "Woman, why do you involve me? My hour has not yet come." Now, to me, when I read that in English, does that sound a little disrespectful? Yeah. The culture in the Greek, not so much. I mean, it's like, the first miracle was that, in John is that, Jesus' mama didn't grab him by the ear. It does. And, I would never expect if my children were like, "Woman," to my wife, there would be things that would have to be discussed. You know what I mean? But really, it's kind of, this is like where translation sometimes misses the thing. And it would be kind of more like ma'am or dear woman or ma'am, or, not quite the impact that the English would have. And he says, "My hour has not yet come." And really, it's not time yet to make a public scene. And John uses the term "the hour," "my hour," "his hour," to really indicate a time when Jesus is going to return to the Father through his death and resurrection. And so it's not the time to reveal his glory yet. But Jesus kind of, I guess his mom senses he's going to do something anyway. And his mother says to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." And Mary orders the servants, which is kind of interesting because you kind of think, well, maybe this is like cousins of Jesus or something. Like maybe there's some connection here. She has some authority here. She just kind of knows Jesus is going to do something. It says this in verse 6. "Nearby stood 6 stone water jars, the kind used by the Jews for ceremonial washing, each holding from 20 to 30 gallons. And there was like ceremonial cleansings and washings. I don't think we've talked a lot about that, but they had these big jars because you kind of had to be ritually clean, and you had a bunch because it was a large wedding, big stone jar things. And Jesus says to the servants, "Fill the jars with water." So they filled them to the brim. Then he told them, "Now draw some out and take it to the master of the banquet." They did so, and the master of the banquet tasted the water that had been turned into wine. He did not realize where it had come from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew. Then he called the bridegroom aside and said, "Everyone brings out the choice wine first and the cheaper wine after the guests have had too much to drink, but you have saved the best till now." In other words, most people kind of serve the good stuff first and bring out the cheap stuff. You have really good hors d'oeuvres, and then you have some stuff to fill you up later at the end of the end of things. And then it says this in verse 11: "What Jesus did here in Cana in Galilee was the first of the signs through which he revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him." And after this, he went down to Capernaum with his mother and his brothers and his disciples, and they stayed there for a few days. So here's like the awkward thing. So Jesus' first big miracle is contributing wine to a big party. Does that seem like what you would expect? I mean, when you launch something new like a business today, what do? We do like social media campaigns, big launch parties. It's like kind of something kind of big and meaningful. So Jesus is to go to a small hick town and supply a lot of wine, and it's a lot. I mean, 6 large jars. It's really, you're talking 20 to 30 gallons per each container, so it's 120 to 180 gallons. Be like 3 to 4 bathtubs full, 16 to 23 kegs. Different estimates, 600 to 900 bottles of wine. So Jesus' first big miracle is to reveal his glory, is to reveal his divine glory, is to save us from a catering disaster. And it's funny because then, there's all these debates in New Testament studies whether the wine is alcoholic, and where it gets confusing is the Greek word for wine is like the same as what it would be for grape juice, so then you can argue all kinds of things. And I mean, oh my gosh, I have been in long debates that have lasted for for really long times about this and everything. I've gotten to the point in my life where I just don't feel like arguing anymore. Anyway, but I think sometimes in our arguments over whether the wine had alcohol in it or not, and depending on what kind of tradition you're from, you might argue one way or the other. Or if you're not from any tradition, you didn't even know this was a debate until today. Maybe you're not worried about it. I think they're all kind of missing the point. The point is, wine in the Bible is this symbol for joy. And we miss the miracle because we're arguing about all these little things. And the miracle is not just a catering disaster that gets thwarted. And so some small town wedding can go off well, and God's glory is revealed in that. But really the point is, God's grace is abundant. And it's enough for all. And there's this clearing of the clearing of the temple follows this too. If you were to read through the court of the. If you ever heard the whole story of the clearing of the temple, forever we like in the what was it like the 90s, it was like, what would Jesus do? That was like a big thing with youth groups. Anybody was in youth groups, it was WWJD. I still have like WWJD bracelets and stuff. Anybody remember that stuff? Anyone go? That was like the thing, And I had a pastor who I really admired. I would always go, what would Jack do? And I would never call him Jack to his face because I really respected him and he was Pastor Stepp. But I would be like, what would Jack do? Because he was so godly. But anyway, so what would Jesus do? And that was like a big challenging thing when I was a youth pastor back then. What would Jesus do? And we really want to do what Jesus do. But the clearing of the temple, Jesus walks in, he starts flipping over tables. So when people say act like Jesus, I just remind them that sometimes flipping over tables is an option. But if you were to read the story of the temple, Jesus comes in, he's flipping over tables, and he's upset because what should have been a house of prayer, which should have been a house for a place for all people to come, they crowded with a bunch of tables selling stuff. They were cheating people as they got in there. And so instead of being a place where all nations, the Gentiles, could come in, it became a big, and I always think of, and I know we've gone in more detail at times on this story, but I always picture like when you go to a stadium and they're charging like $20 for a hot dog. And you're like, what? It's that kind of thing. You had to buy your sacrifices there. They're ripping off. And again, they took the place of the people who should be there because they had to do it inside. And ultimately, Jesus comes. He fulfills the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, all the law there, and it really foreshadows what he's about to do. He's about to bring grace to everybody, and there's this tension throughout the whole gospel when we read it. Because if you're in church today, there's a good chance you've heard some of the story, right? Like I don't know if you know, but Easter, we celebrate Jesus. He goes to the cross, he dies for us. He rises on Easter morning. Spoiler alert. Like you've probably heard this story though if you've been in church much, or you Googled it right now when I was talking about it. I don't know, but there's this. We know where this story is headed, and really that's why this whole season is a time to sort of step back from our normal lives, take a look at who Jesus is, and celebrate the fact that he gives us new life when we put our faith and our trust in him. And this wine and this celebration at Cana remind us that this ultimate fulfillment is someday coming. His grace is going to be lavished, and he's bringing more joy than we can imagine. The Bible is an interesting book, and for so many ways, so many things. But if you really think about it, it's like there's a couple weddings in between, but it's sort of the whole story of the Bible is bookended by like two weddings. Because in the beginning, there's Adam and Eve, and so there's kind of like the first wedding, if you will. And so there's people. But then the second big wedding, well, it's not the second, but the last, is they call it the marriage supper of the Lamb. And in the book of Revelation, it says, Then I heard what seemed to be a great multitude, like the roar of many waters and the sound of mighty peals of thunder crying out, "Hallelujah, for the Lord our God, the Almighty reigns. Let us rejoice and exult and give him glory. For the marriage of the Lamb has come, and his bride has made herself ready." And then down a little further, it says, "Blessed are those who are invited to the marriage supper of the Lamb." And he said to me, "These are the true words of God." And so there's this ultimately, we call this final event of history, the marriage supper of the Lamb. And the wine in the celebration at Cana reminded that ultimately fulfillment is coming. Jesus is coming to fulfill the law. Jesus is coming so that we can have new life. And there's ultimately, it's not just about wine at a party somewhere, but it's a symbol of something much more. Jesus provides an abundance. Jesus provides wine in abundance. And Jesus provides forgiveness to us in abundance. And when we put our faith in him, we can be changed. When our faith is in him, we will be changed. We can live differently because the Holy Spirit comes and lives inside of us and changes us and makes us someone new. And the good news that we celebrate this Easter season is that when we put our faith and our trust in him, he lavishes forgiveness upon us. So come and see this Easter season as we explore these signs that point to something much more. So